Hey everyone, Kyle Erickson here. We just had the latest Apple event with all the new product reveals, and one that I think, in my opinion, has kind of slid under the radar a little bit is the M1 iPad Air. I have the previous generation iPad Air, which has the A14 chip and was released in 2020. And I've seen a lot of people out there saying that it's not worth upgrading from this model to the latest 5th gen model with the M1 that was just announced, but I am going to tell you why it's worth it. So, first of all, the biggest change in here that I based most of my decision on was that the newest version announced is packed with an M1 chip, which is 60% faster than the A14, and the GPU is twice as fast as well. Depending on who you are, that may or may not be a big deal. A lot of people just use their iPad for casual use, maybe some web browsing, checking emails, that sort of thing. And in that case, if that's all you're intending to use it for, the jump from the A14 to the M1 probably isn't going to be noticed. But I think in my case, I don't really use my iPad for anything casual. I use Lightroom quite a bit, and I will occasionally pop into Affinity Photo and use some other productivity tools that do use some power. And lately I have been wanting to test out some more resource-heavy work like video editing. Provided the world does get back to normal here a little bit this year, I may be traveling some more and recording some video, and having something small like this versus a 16-inch MacBook Pro hefty boy might be a lot more manageable. It's just much smaller and easier to lug around with you. I also do still like to play around with coding from time to time, doing some software development, mostly for fun at this stage, and just to keep up with new trends and new SDKs and APIs that are released. And I think we will see more tools built for iPad to be able to do those things. There are a decent number of tools available to help you do those things now, but I think it's probably pretty likely that we'll see that jump up a little bit as we move into more powerful processors and out of these mobile chips. I've been using an M1 chip since shortly after they came out, so I do know how well they perform and what to expect in that regard, and I just really like having that power available to me. And even though I may not use my current iPad Air for a lot of those tasks, I'm kind of future-proofing for when I do start to go out of the city again and start to be a little bit more mobile. Now, obviously, if you're considering doing some of these things, the 64GB storage option just doesn't make any sense. And I think that if you're using this at all for productivity related stuff, or you've got a bunch of apps or videos on here, it's just not going to be enough. And frankly, I don't know why they even bother with that option. It didn't make sense when they released the 4th gen iPad Air, and it makes even less sense now. They should probably just start that off at 128, but in any case, I'm jumping up to the 256, and I think some people are probably going to start asking, if you're making that jump in price and in storage, doesn't it just make sense to grab the M1 iPad Pro? Which, for me, the answer is no. In comparison, these models are very similar. They have about the same performance. The form factor is very similar, but for sure the iPad Pro M1 does pull ahead in some areas. It has a ProMotion display, the speakers are a touch better. You've got a rear dual camera setup on the Pro where the Air only has one camera. There is Face ID on the Pro where the Air only has Touch ID, and the USB-C port does support higher transfer speeds. The price difference, just looking at the 256GB models, is about $150. So it's not super close, and I do want to break down why a lot of those things just don't really matter to me. First off, I literally never use the rear camera on my iPad outside of testing, especially when I usually have a phone in my pocket, and I don't think a ton of folks use the rear cameras. The front one is the one that you're more likely to use, and it did get upgraded this year and is almost identical to the one in the Pro, so that's pretty much a wash. You can definitely make an argument for the ProMotion display if you want. Totally understandable, but I still really like the display on the Air, and I'm fine with making that sacrifice. It's not a deal breaker, Same goes for Touch ID. I actually really like Touch ID. And with that transfer speed, I think one thing that you really have to think about is if you're wanting to use Thunderbolt or USB 4 that comes on that Pro, the accessories that support those speeds are a lot higher in price. What you are going to find is that most USB hubs and accessories are going to match transfer speeds that the iPad Air supports. So when you start jumping higher than that, when we get into Thunderbolt and USB 4, you're probably looking at $300 to $400 for things like hubs and docks. And not only that, but someone like me who already owns a 4th gen iPad Air, because it is the same form factor as the previous generation, I can still use all my old cases and accessories. If you splurged on a super nice case like the Nomad one that I have that retails somewhere around $149, you do save yourself a lot of money there as well. So it's really not just as simple as looking at the price and making that comparison. When it comes down to it, I just chose to pick up the latest gen iPad Air because I think there are some really decent upgrades in here that do really elevate it over the previous model. I know what the M1 can do, having used it in all my other machines, so it's just really reassuring that I can use this in pretty much any circumstance where I may need the power of a laptop, and I know it does perform how I need it to. I am very curious to hear if anyone else has picked up anything from this year's Apple event. If you did, or if you just want to chat about this new iPad Air, please leave a comment down below. I will be doing a review of that iPad when it does show up and I've had a chance to play around with it. So if you want to check out that review, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, and I will see you next time.